So you're still catching me at this hour? I thought I'd already gone cold. No left foot or right foot guessing tonight. I just get it wrong anyway. Same old deal. If you're here, drop a hi or share your phone battery percentage so I know I'm not totally out of circulation. All right, enough chatter. Let's dive into today's little story. The man's name was Kayla, a wilderness survival expert. Every night when he went for runs, the smell of barbecue from street stalls tempted him too much, so he brought his dog out into the frozen forest to live off the land. After arriving at a patch of flat ground sheltered from the wind and snow, Kayla first gave his dog a hearty meal. Then he pulled out the star of this survival trip, a fresh leg of lamb. It wasn't that he couldn't afford street barbecue, he just knew roasting lamb in the snow had way better value. But before he could get to grilling, he needed a proper shelter. So Kayla started digging and clearing, and before long he had carved out a neat square patch of level ground. Next came gathering the wood needed to build his shelter. Kayla always followed one principle in the wild: respect nature. He never cut down living trees or plants, instead choosing only dried, peeling trunks that had already withered. If it can't bloom into a flower, he thought, then let it serve as the bones of my shelter. With that, he collected a good pile of deadwood and began planning his cabin on the cleared ground. Using 3 sturdy trees as the central supports, he lashed the treated logs together in a triangular frame to form the base of the shelter. Since he was surviving in extreme cold, Kayla thought everything through carefully. He built the base more than a meter above the ground, away from the frozen earth. That way, he could stay safe from wild creatures and also avoid freezing. Though only in his 20s, his wilderness skills were sharp. In no time, one side of a neat wind-blocking wall was up. But as the snow kept falling and the temperature dropped to unbearable levels, Kayla lit a fire beneath the windbreak, warming the space so he could keep working. As the bonfire roared to life, the surrounding temperature improved dramatically. Kayla filled his kettle with packed snow, hung it over the flames to melt and boil, and between building tasks his eyes often drifted toward the leg of lamb hanging from a tree, knowing that once the shelter was complete, it would be a feast worth savoring. On the raised base of his shelter, he arranged and fastened logs together to form a wooden bed, perfectly sized for him. When he lay down on it for a quick test, it actually felt pretty comfortable. Since night was fast approaching, Kayla kept the shelter's walls simple. He stretched a rain tarp over the crossbeams above the base, securing the edges to the tree trunks with rope. As for the gaps between the tarp and the ground, no problem for someone seasoned in the wild. He built a small fence frame out of thin branches as support, then piled snow against it until the tarp's edges were buried and sealed. Once everything was fixed in place, the shelter was finally complete. He gathered some sticks and, with his sharp axe, stripped off their bark, stacking them neatly beside the fire to serve as part of his living space. As night fell, the forest turned pitch black, so Kayla hung 2 lanterns on his shelter, casting warm light inside. Once everything was arranged, he boiled water and made himself a cup of coffee, sitting with his dog in the cozy shelter while the wind howled and snowflakes drifted down. For a moment, he could simply savor the peace and comfort. But as the night deepened, Kayla glanced at the leg of lamb hanging from the tree and realized time was short. Since roasting it would take at least an hour or 2, he settled for something quicker. He heated up a packet of rice over the coals, choosing restraint over indulgence, and even carved himself a wooden rice spatula by hand. Sitting in his warm shelter, Kayla shared dinner with his dog. After the meal, he went back to gathering firewood, knowing that in the freezing wilderness, survival through the night depended on 2 things: thick camping gear and a fire that never went out. Only the steady burn of the bonfire could keep heat flowing into the shelter. With that, man and dog could rest comfortably even in such a fragile home. He hung his snow-soaked boots near the fire to dry, shed his heavy winter coat, and stretched out on his spacious wooden bed. Wrapped in a warm sleeping bag and bathed in the fire's glow, he drifted peacefully to sleep. His dog chose instead to curl up by the fire rather than squeeze into the bed. By the next morning, the snow-covered forest had transformed into a breathtaking winter wonderland. The pristine landscape looked like a painting come to life. Kayla crawled out of his sleeping bag, dressed, and noticed the fire was nearly out while the big leg of lamb still hung frozen solid from the tree. He quickly split some firewood to keep the flames alive and warm up the shelter. Today's mission was clear: finally satisfy his craving and roast that lamb. He took the rock-hard leg down, tore off the plastic wrap, and secured it with thin wire, suspending it over the fire. Soon, under the heat of the coals, the lamb began to sizzle and drip with fragrant oil. While waiting for it to cook, Kayla brewed himself a cup of coffee and sat by the aromatic fire, savoring the warmth and the anticipation. The rice spatula he had carved the night before was still a bit rough, so Kayla carefully refined it over the embers, smoothing it out with patience. Once it was hardened and polished by the heat, he cleaned off the ash. Then, taking out some sweet bean paste, he spread it generously over the freshly roasted lamb and ate in big, hearty bites, fully indulging in the meal he had been waiting for. I've got to say, that was a breakfast like no other. After the unusual meal, while the lamb leg was still roasting, Kayla took a saw and worked on a few logs, splitting them in half with his axe and smoothing out the cut surfaces. He wedged them between tree trunks to make a simple storage rack for his camping gear. Meanwhile, the lamb leg continued to roast over the coals, its skin turning golden and crispy. Kayla sliced off a small piece with his knife and gave it to his dog first, making sure it was fully cooked. Once confirmed, he took the leg of lamb down from the fire. Memories of the street barbecue stalls came to mind, but now here he was, clutching his own roasted lamb and tearing into it without restraint. He was starving, and in no time the leg was picked clean down to the bone, though his dog certainly helped along the way. Watching it all unfold was enough to make anyone's mouth water, wishing for just a bite. Roasting the lamb had taken hours, and between cooking and eating, night had fallen once again. Man and dog each curled into their own bedding, and so ended their 2-day, 2-night adventure in the snowy wilderness. That's right, it's still Kayla, the wilderness survival expert. Some folks joke that Kayla is just a dog. But no, Kayla is Kayla. Every night, his runs left him tortured by the smell of street-side barbecue stalls, which is why he came out here to live in the wild. Just yesterday, in the shelter he had finished building, he roasted an entire leg of lamb. When he got tired of the rich flavor, he even dipped it in snow for a refreshing bite. Once his taste buds were thoroughly satisfied. So, with his dog by his side, Kayla set off once more. Man and dog trudged through the thick snow, searching for a better flat spot to camp. He came upon a towering tree. After all, as the saying goes, under a big tree there's always good shade. Setting up beneath it would not only shield him from wind and snow, but also give him a beautiful snowy view. Busy at work in the snow, Kayla soon cleared a foundation for his tent. But with the sun already dipping into the horizon, he needed to hurry if he wanted to settle in before dark. Inside the pitched tent, he lit a candle and, by its glow, assembled a small fireplace in the corner. With its warmth, even as heavy snow fell and cold winds whipped outside, the inside of the tent felt as cozy as spring. Kayla lit the dry firewood in the fireplace, and soon the flames crackled warmly. Outside, the darkness was so deep he couldn't see his hand in front of his face, but inside, he and his dog crouched by the fire, soaking in the heat. After a while, he blew out the candle and drifted off into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, the tent was buried under a blanket of snow. Kayla stepped outside, looked around, and found the scenery breathtaking. But he had no time to linger on the beauty. His first priority was to clear the heavy snow off the tent before it collapsed under the weight. Snowflakes were still drifting from the sky as Kayla went back inside and played affectionately with his dog. He opened a can of food so the chubby pup wouldn't go hungry. Suddenly, thunder rumbled overhead. Strange, really, how it could be storming with lightning in the middle of a heavy snowfall. If anyone knows the science behind that, do share. Meanwhile, Kayla rekindled the fireplace, filled a kettle with snow, and set it on to boil. The snowy landscape outside was beautiful, but it seemed to irritate the dog, who stubbornly refused to come back inside. Kayla poured himself a cup of coffee with the freshly boiled water and gazed fondly at his dog lying in the snow. Then it hit him. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. He split a log in half with his axe, smoothed the cut surface with his knife, and pieced together a sturdy chopping board. On it, he began preparing his meal. Fresh beef was minced finely, mixed with a few wood shavings, and pressed into a lump. He set the mixture on a tray, sprinkled in some seasoning, and kneaded it thoroughly with his hands until the flavors were fully absorbed. Finally, he rolled the meat into round patties, lining them up neatly on the board. Ready for cooking. The dog, tempted by the smell, came nosing closer. Kayla peeled some potatoes, cut them into strips, and placed them neatly on the tray. He added the marinated beef meatballs, then garnished the dish with cherry tomatoes and a touch of garlic to cut the gamminess and enhance the aroma. With techniques like this, you'd think he had trained in a kitchen for years. It wasn't something a novice could pull off. Finally, he slid the tray into the fireplace, letting the gentle heat slowly roast the food to perfection. While waiting for the food to finish, Kayla warmed his stiff feet by the fire. The air was freezing, and with the tent flap left open, he slipped into his sleeping bag to stay cozy as the meal cooked. His dog, growing impatient, stood by the entrance, eyes fixed on the fireplace in anticipation. When the dish was finally ready, Kayla pulled it out. The colors were vibrant, juices glistening, a true feast for the eyes. Sitting beside the warm fireplace, he dug into his first proper meal in 2 days, of course, sharing it with his faithful companion. After the hearty meal, man and dog went out again to gather dead branches, which Kayla chopped into small pieces with his axe and stacked into the fireplace. Before long, night had fallen once more. He roasted a few chestnuts over the fire, and under the glow of candlelight, the shelter looked especially warm and inviting. Munching on his little snacks, Kayla happily wrapped up his 2-day, 2-night adventure in the snowy wilderness. Jerry, ever the one to take the unconventional path, chose to head into the mountains in the sweltering heat. Tired of constantly being chased around at home by Tom, he decided to leave and build a new home for himself in the jungle. He picked a spot sheltered from the wind and began gathering materials for a shelter. Luckily, the forest was full of dried branches and fallen wood, so collecting them wasn't too difficult. With just a bit of effort, he soon had a big pile ready for construction. Jerry used 2 sturdy tree trunks on the slope as pillars, then carefully set a grooved beam across the top, fixing it snugly between them. To prevent it from slipping, he reinforced the lower part with wooden pegs. With solid supports in place, he moved on to building the base of the shelter. Since a stable foundation is the key to a strong and tidy wooden cabin, Jerry made clever use of the slope's angle. By connecting 4 thick crossbeams, he bridged the gap between the slope and the pillars, creating a firm, balanced base for his new home. He kept everything aligned on a single level, securing each joint with wooden pegs until a sturdy frame was complete. Laying the collected branches across it, he quickly formed a flat platform on the slope. To make the base even stronger, Jerry swung his axe with determination, carving grooves into the ends of the logs so they could lock tightly into the foundation. He drilled holes into the logs and secured them with wooden pegs. With Jerry's steady effort, the sound of chopping and chiseling echoed loudly through the forest. One by one, the thick logs were notched and fitted together seamlessly, locking into place. The shelter might not have been as solid as a mountain, but it was certainly sturdy enough to stand firm against the elements. But calling it steady as an old ox wouldn't be an exaggeration. Though only in his 20s, Jerry's strength was remarkable. Without resting after finishing the base, he immediately moved on to building the walls. Following the same method, he used logs of equal size, stacking them layer by layer with tight-fitting mortise and tenon joints. For each layer, he drilled holes into the ends and secured them with wooden pegs, locking everything firmly together as the walls rose higher. You really have to admire Jerry's craftsmanship. The walls of his shelter had already risen to half his height, and he hadn't used a single nail. It was a skill straight out of the wisdom passed down from the ancients. While building the walls, he even left space on one side for a wooden door, showing that he already had a clear vision for the design. Log by log, the walls grew taller, square, and orderly. For those who love watching wilderness construction, seeing Jerry at work before bed is a treat, every detail handled with patience and care. Once the walls reached a certain height, Jerry also left space for windows. With windows, the problem of lighting inside was solved. Before he knew it, the walls had risen to roof level. At the same time, the logs he stacked grew shorter with each layer, forming a triangular shape. Between the 2 walls, Jerry fixed a beam to serve as the roof ridge, and for the roofing structure, he chose a stable A-frame design. Using a stick as a guide, Jerry carefully sawed down the stacked logs, cutting them at matching angles to create 2 neat A-frame ends. Because of the height, he had already set up makeshift scaffolding from branches. Out here in the wild, every bit of resourcefulness counted. Waterproofing the roof was crucial, so he first stretched a tarp across the top. Then, standing on the scaffolding, he began building the roof. This was the first time nails appeared in the project. Jerry, likely pressed for time, set aside the mortise and tenon method. Maybe he hadn't yet mastered its finer details. Still, With the steady clang of hammering, the roof came together quickly, and before long, the shelter stood complete. Jerry gathered a large amount of fresh moss from the trees to seal the gaps in the walls. Soft and fine in texture, the moss fit perfectly into every crevice, blocking drafts from sneaking in and making the shelter much more secure. Once the walls were sealed, Jerry moved on to the logs. He sawed them to the same height, then carved grooves into them. With 4 wooden posts and grooved beams, it was clear he was preparing to build a bed inside the shelter. One by one, the smoothly cut logs were stacked neatly, ready for assembly. The posts served as the base supports, the beams as crossbars, and together they formed the bed's frame. Finally, the polished logs were laid out evenly across the top. And just like that, a spacious, solid wood bed was complete. With the bed in place, a wooden door was the next necessity. Jerry quickly assembled a square frame from branches, then fixed leftover sticks across it for reinforcement. The result was a sturdy wooden door, which he carefully fitted into the doorway he had left earlier. His craftsmanship was impressive. His margin of error in this wilderness build was down to just a few millimeters. Finally, by attaching broad leaves as covering, the door was ready to block out both the cold drafts and any unwelcome critters wandering nearby. Since he had left in a hurry and hadn't brought any glass, Jerry could only use plastic film for the windows. But the light still came through just fine. With the 3 essentials inside, bed, door, and windows, settled, he went out to gather pine branches. The fresh green needles were soft and fragrant, and when spread across the floor, they made a perfect natural carpet for his new home. Before he knew it, Jerry's log cabin was nearly finished. The only thing missing was a fireplace. He went down to the riverbed and carefully chose flat, sturdy stones, keeping only the best. Hauling them back dozens of meters to the shelter, he arranged them neatly in one corner, creating a solid base. With the stone foundation in place, the problem of heat insulation from the floor was solved, making it the perfect spot to install his fireplace. On the roof and walls, Jerry fixed a fireproof insulation blanket, leaving just enough space for the chimney to pass through. To make sure the chimney wouldn't ignite the roof, he even smeared mud around the opening for extra protection. With that final touch, Jerry's log cabin shelter was complete. At last, he had built a true home of his own. Jerry chopped up some wood shavings and used them to light the newly installed fireplace. With the fire crackling, the inside of the cabin was warm and secure, even though the jungle outside was damp and chilly. After so many days of hard work, he finally treated himself to a cooking session. Sitting on his wooden bed, he pulled out the chopping board and diced the potatoes he had brought along. Over the fireplace, he set up a small grill and placed the potato chunks on it, letting them simmer slowly over the gentle flames. Once the potatoes were tender, Jerry placed a steak on the grill. Under the searing heat of the coals, the meat soon turned perfectly juicy and mouthwatering. He sliced it on the chopping board with his knife, then sat beside the cozy fireplace to enjoy his feast. Steak, potatoes, and cherry tomatoes, simple but balanced, hearty, and delicious. After filling his stomach, Jerry blew out the candle and, with only the warm glow of the fireplace, drifted peacefully off to sleep. From the very start of construction to its final completion, Jerry's log cabin shelter had carried him right into winter. Now, nestled in the snowy landscape, the little wooden house stood small yet refined, looking both sturdy and picturesque against the white backdrop. Fresh out of bed, Jerry stepped outside with a cup of coffee in hand, sipping as he admired the beautiful snowy scenery. And with that, he happily brought to a close his snowfield camping adventure, a journey that had stretched across 2 whole seasons. Ryan had a wooden cabin shelter all his own, tucked away deep in the snowy forest. Whenever he had the time, he would retreat there to experience a rhythm of life completely different from the bustling city. The first thing he did upon entering was light the fireplace. After all, with the cabin left unoccupied for so long, the chill inside could bite right through his back. Once the flames roared to life and the warmth spread, the cabin became cozy and welcoming again. As Ryan fed more firewood into the fireplace, thin streams of smoke curled up from the chimney, bringing life to the snow-covered cabin. The thick blanket of snow on the roof would soon begin to melt and slide off. After an entire season of snowfall, the dampness had warped the wooden door. Ryan took his axe and carefully trimmed and reshaped the frame. Luckily, it wasn't a serious issue. After some patient work, the door fit snugly again. In such a cold environment, stocking up on firewood was a wise move. He swung his axe with force. splitting logs into smaller pieces that were easier to feed into the fireplace and would also burn more efficiently. Ryan stacked the freshly chopped firewood neatly by the fireplace, then turned his attention to cooking. He heated up a quick meal of rice in a pot, and before long he was sitting at the table, enjoying a hearty bite that filled his stomach. After eating, he stepped outside and used hot water to help clear the heavy snow from the roof. Though the cabin was built from thick, sturdy logs, nearly a meter of snow piling up on top could strain the structure. Clearing it off in time was the only way to ease the burden and keep his shelter safe through the winter. After a long day's work, Ryan sat by the entrance of his cabin, sipping hot tea while taking in the breathtaking snowy landscape before him. As night fell, Ryan lit a bonfire in the open space outside his cabin. He set a pan over the flames, drizzled in some oil, and fried a few sausages, cracking in a couple of eggs alongside them. Soon the sausages were golden brown, filling the air with a mouth-watering aroma. Sitting by the warm fire, Ryan dug in hungrily, savoring every bite. Under the glow of lantern light and firelight, the snow-covered pines looked even more majestic. After eating his fill, Ryan smothered the bonfire with snow, then returned to his cabin to rest for the night. Early the next morning, Ryan stepped outside, greeted by the biting chill of 28 degrees. After a night of rest, he was full of energy and decided to improve his cabin by adding a window to one of the side walls to bring in more light. With the steady buzz of his tools echoing in the frosty air, he quickly carved out a neat, square frame, ready to fit a window in place. In the morning forest, sunlight streamed through the gaps in the snowy pines, dazzling and bright. Ryan took the window he had prepared earlier and fixed it firmly into the frame, filling the gaps with sponge and sealing it tightly for insulation. With a glass window now in place, he could sit inside his cabin, warm and comfortable, while enjoying the stunning winter scenery outside at any time. The man, named Raj, was a seasoned wilderness survival expert. With his backpack on, he arrived at the foot of a slope, planning to use the terrain to his advantage to build a snowfield shelter. He marked out the foundation with a shovel and began digging. Luckily, since it was only early winter, the ground wasn't frozen solid yet and was still fairly soft. Before long, Raj had carved out a pit about half a meter deep, leaving space for a heated Kang-style bed in the process. On one side of the bed, Raj used his shovel to dig out a fireplace chamber, with a chimney running upward to the surface. Then, he gathered a large number of straight logs and began constructing the wall frame of the shelter. With a solid foundation already in place, assembling the structure was much easier. He drove the logs vertically into the soil ridge as posts, then connected them with crossbeams. In no time, a sturdy wooden frame stood tall. For the roof, he laid logs neatly across the beams, leaving a slope that perfectly matched the angle of the hillside. Though only in his 20s, Raj's craftsmanship was impressive. Under his careful design and steady hands, the shelter quickly took shape. The wooden framework rose in clear layers, the top providing wind protection, the next shielding against falling snow. With a clever bit of work, he even propped up a skylight that opened upward. To ensure the frame's stability and balance, Raj cut smaller logs of equal length and neatly secured them at the roof joints. This not only strengthened the structure, but also gave the whole cabin a more unified look. He kept gathering timber from the forest, sawing each piece to the right size to seal the walls. With the steady rhythm of hammer-striking nails, 2 of the walls were soon fully enclosed. The excess edges were trimmed neatly with a saw, and for the 2 side walls, Raj simply adjusted the logs to match the wall length. With each piece nailed securely into place, the structure grew tighter and sturdier. Before long, all 4 walls of the shelter were fully sealed, marking a major step in its completion. Building the door was much simpler. Raj laid the logs neatly into a square frame, connected them with crossbeams, and crafted a sturdy wooden door, which he fitted into the frame. With that, the shelter finally began to feel like a home. But to truly make it livable, he still had work to do. The roof's waterproofing was a top priority. Raj stretched a rain tarp tightly across the roof, making sure no corner was left unchecked. To secure it, he piled earth from the digger over the edges, preventing strong winds from tearing it loose while also reinforcing the entire structure. Raj paid great attention to detail, never overlooking even the smallest things. After covering the entire roof with soil, he gathered fresh pine branches. Their vibrant green color and soft texture not only decorated the roof, but also blended the shelter seamlessly into the forest, so well hidden that passersby would hardly notice it. Inside, he wrapped the earthen walls with tarp, giving them a cleaner look while also adding protection against moisture. The fireplace was sealed and strengthened with sticky clay, ensuring it would be safe to use. At the entrance, Raj used leftover scraps of wood to quickly craft a simple set of tables, chairs, and a bench, completing the basic furnishings of his new woodland home. With the shelter now complete, Raj only needed to hang a pair of lanterns at the entrance to make it truly livable. Back inside, he lit the fireplace with dry wood. In the bitter cold of the snowy wilderness, the shelter had been damp and chilly, but with the fire blazing it became warm and inviting, and the coals could double as a stove for boiling water and cooking. At his newly built table, he set to work preparing the food he had brought. He chopped the ingredients into bite-sized pieces, skewered them neatly, and let them marinate with seasoning. Soon, the skewers sizzled over the fireplace, filling the cabin with the mouth-watering aroma of roasted meat. Paired with his simple staple, it made for a perfect meal. Sitting beside his shelter in the snowy night, Raj enjoyed his feast. This cozy, self-made life in the wilderness was a kind of freedom and comfort many of us can only dream of. After the meal, Raj lit the lanterns at the entrance, and under their warm glow, the shelter looked especially cozy. I couldn't help but wish I could stay there for a few days myself. As night deepened, he went back inside, closed the wooden door, and drifted into a peaceful sleep in the warmth of his cabin. The next morning, Raj packed up his camping gear, hung the lanterns on his backpack, closed the door behind him, and set off once again, beginning a new adventure in the snowy wilderness. Thank you for staying with me until the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell so we can explore more exciting survival experiences together. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Goodbye, and see you next time.